The cardboard box landed on the boardroom table with a sound that silenced the entire floor. Not a dramatic slam, not a crash, just a flat, tired thud, the kind of sound that comes from something heavy being set down by someone who no longer has the strength to care how it looks. Nora Ashby stood at the head of the table she had occupied for 11 years and looked at the faces of people who had once called her visionary. Now they looked at the floor, at their phones, at each other, anywhere but at her. The receiver had been appointed at 9 that morning. By 10:15, security had already changed the access codes on the executive elevator. She found that out when her card didn't work. She took the stairs. The box held the usual things: a small succulent that had somehow survived 4 office moves, 2 framed photographs, a coffee mug with a chip in the handle that she'd never thrown away because it was the first thing she'd bought when Ashby Capital was nothing more than a sublet desk and a borrowed fax machine. She picked up the mug last, turned it over once, and set it back in the box. Outside, Bay Street was doing what Bay Street always does, moving, indifferent. A courier nearly walked through her. She stepped aside, shifted the box against her hip, and stood there on the sidewalk in front of the building she had spent a decade filling with her ambition. The morning was sharp, that particular Toronto cold in late October that gets into the collar before you've even decided which direction to walk. She had not brought a scarf. She had not anticipated needing to leave in a hurry. She had not anticipated a lot of things. 3 years earlier, Nora Ashby had been the kind of name that appeared in the subheadings of financial journalism. Not the headline, not yet, but close enough to taste. Ashby Capital managed a mid-sized portfolio with an outsized reputation for aggressive growth strategies and what the Globe called her surgical appetite for undervalued assets. She had built it from nothing. Literally nothing. A line of credit she'd taken out against her first condo. A roster of 4 clients who believed in her before she'd given them any real reason to, and a work ethic that her ex-husband had once described as the most disciplined form of self-destruction I've ever witnessed. She took that as a compliment. The firm grew. The portfolio swelled. She hired up, moved the office twice, made some calls that turned out to be right at exactly the right time, and by her 41st birthday, she was overseeing close to $400 million in assets under management and had a waiting list of clients that stretched into the following fiscal year. That was when she hired Theo. Theo Brant had come to her through an unconventional route. He hadn't applied through the proper channels. One of her associates had flagged his name after seeing a paper he'd published, not in a finance journal, but in a municipal policy review out of Hamilton. It was about infrastructure depreciation in mid-sized Canadian cities and the long-term tax-based implications of deferred maintenance. Dry subject. Extraordinary analysis. The kind of thinking that didn't care whether anyone was impressed by it. She brought him in for a meeting more out of curiosity than anything else. He showed up in a jacket that was slightly too large in the shoulders, with a manila folder held closed by an elastic band, and a quiet that was different from nervousness, more like someone who had learned to be economical with noise because noise cost him something. She found out later that his daughter had a rare mitochondrial condition that required near-constant monitoring, that he had been the sole caregiver since she was 18 months old, that he had built his professional life around the edges of hers, early mornings, late nights, the margins of other people's schedules because there was no other way to do it. She didn't find that out during the interview. During the interview, she found out that he thought about risk the way she thought about risk, which was to say seriously and without sentiment, and that he could explain complex capital exposure in plain language without losing a single percentage point of accuracy. She hired him. He was good, better than good. Within 18 months, he had restructured the way she modeled long-term volatility and identified 2 positions that outperformed projections by a margin that made her other analysts look like they were working from different information. They were. He just happened to be working from better instincts. The trouble started, as trouble often does, not with a failure, but with a success that moved too fast. She had positioned Ashby Capital heavily in a regional development trust that was, by every metric she trusted, undervalued and on the edge of a significant correction upward. It was the kind of trade she had made before. She understood the exposure. She believed in the floor. The floor moved. A combination of factors, rising rates, a municipal zoning decision that came out of nowhere, and a financing collapse in the Anchor project, turned a calculated position into a cascading problem over the course of 6 weeks. She tried to manage it. She moved things around. She made some calls she shouldn't have made, not because they were illegal, but because they were desperate. And desperation in capital management is its own kind of exposure. By the time the dust settled, she had lost close to 40% of one fund and triggered a compliance review that led, eventually, to the receiver standing in her office at 9 on a Tuesday morning with very polite language and no room for discussion. 2 weeks before all of that happened, Theo had asked to take a Friday off. His daughter, her name was Maisie. She was 7, she had large brown eyes, and apparently the kind of laugh that strangers remarked on, had been scheduled for a procedure at Sick Kids. A monitoring surgery, not emergency, but significant enough to require a full day and a parent present. He had used every available flex day. He needed one more. Nora had said no. She had said it the way she said most things in that period, quickly, efficiently, with her attention already on the next item. There was a client meeting that afternoon she needed him in. There was a presentation to prep. The timing was not good. He said he understood, then said quietly that he didn't have anyone else who could take Maisie. She said she was sorry about that, but the timing wasn't something she could move around. He didn't argue. He went back to his desk and, 4 hours later, sent a message saying he had to leave early, that Maisie had been admitted the night before unexpectedly and he was going to the hospital. He asked if someone could cover the afternoon. She sent back a one-line response saying that if he couldn't meet the requirements of the role, they'd need to have a conversation about fit. He resigned the following Monday. She didn't fight it. She was too busy watching the floor move. The months after the receivership were not dramatic in the way people imagine financial collapse to be dramatic. There were no scenes. There was no moment of reckoning. There was just the slow, grinding reduction of a life to its load-bearing elements. The condo went first. She'd leveraged it again when things got tight and the math was no longer in her favor. She moved into a furnished rental in Etobicoke, small enough that the kitchen and the living room occupied the same visual field. She paid the first 2 months with what remained in her personal account. Then she started calculating differently. She reached out to former colleagues. Some replied. Most didn't. The ones who did were kind in the specific, careful way that people are kind when they want to help but not be associated with the problem. She had a few interviews. One went well enough that she let herself think about it for 3 days. Then the offer didn't come. She was not someone who cried easily. She had been told this by enough people across enough years that she believed it about herself. She sat on the edge of the rented bed on the night the offer didn't come and understood, for the first time with genuine clarity, that she had built everything she was around the assumption that her competence would hold. That if she was good enough, consistently enough, for long enough, it would function as a kind of armor. It turned out the armor had its own exposure. She took a contract position doing financial review for a small nonprofit in mid-November. The pay was modest. The work was honest. She took it. The office was in a shared building near Dufferin, 3 floors of organizations existing on stretched budgets and the particular energy of people who have decided that something matters enough to do it badly funded. The coffee in the shared kitchen was terrible. She drank it anyway. She had been there for 6 days when she walked in one morning and found Theo Brant sitting across the hall. He looked the same, a little more tired maybe. The jacket this time fit better. He was reviewing something on a laptop and didn't look up right away. She stood in the doorway of her office and did not move for long enough that a woman passing by in the hallway looked at her with mild concern. When he finally glanced up and saw her, his expression went through something she couldn't fully read, surprise, then something more careful, then nothing in particular. He nodded once, the way you nod at someone in a professional context who you have history with, history that isn't simple. She nodded back. The first 2 days, they did not speak beyond what was necessary. He was apparently contracted to the organization directly across the hall, a financial literacy program for newcomers. She was doing fund compliance review 2 doors down. The building was not large enough for the distance they were both attempting. On the third day, she came into the kitchen when he was standing at the counter, eating an apple and reading something on his phone, and the kitchen was genuinely too small for either of them to pretend the other wasn't there. "How is your daughter?" she said. It came out more flatly than she intended. "She's good," he said. "She had a rough winter. She's good now." "I'm glad." He looked at her for a moment, not unkindly, not warmly either, just with the directness of someone who had decided at some point that he didn't have the energy for performance. "You're doing the compliance work for Carter House," he said. "Yes." "That's good work." "It's fine work," she said. He almost smiled at that, almost. He went back to his phone. She poured the terrible coffee and left. What happened next happened slowly, the way things happen when people are in proximity over time, and neither of them has the social bandwidth to maintain a pretense. They started talking, not about anything significant at first, the building's temperamental heating system, a local budget decision that affected both of their organizations. He mentioned Maisie once, that she had started a new school that was better equipped for her needs, that she had recently developed an opinion about the correct way to make grilled cheese. Butter on the outside, low heat, non-negotiable. Nora found herself thinking about that later, the specificity of it, the way he knew exactly what his daughter thought about grilled cheese. She had been so certain for so long that the version of herself she had built, efficient, focused, able to separate the essential from the noise, was the best version, the highest functioning version. She had looked at people like Theo and seen, if she was being honest, a limitation. Someone who had let something personal constrain what they were capable of professionally. She was beginning to understand that she had it backwards. His constraints hadn't made him smaller. They had made him precise. Every decision he made had weight because his margin for error was real. He thought about risk the way he did because risk wasn't abstract to him. It was Maisie's medical schedule. It was the difference between a Tuesday he could manage and one he couldn't. He had learned to read a balance sheet the way she read her daughter's face, looking for the thing that mattered quickly, accurately, without sentiment clouding the signal. She had thought she operated that way. She had not. She had operated with the confidence of someone who had never truly had to reckon with the cost of being wrong. She understood that now. She was living inside the cost of being wrong. It was a Wednesday in February when things shifted. She had received a message that morning from the last firm she'd been in serious conversation with. They had filled the position. "Thank you for your time," the usual language. She read it in the kitchen before the building properly opened, standing in her coat because she'd arrived early and the heat hadn't kicked in yet. She read it twice. Then she stood very still for a moment, cup in hand, looking at the window that faced the parking lot, and something in her simply stopped. Not dramatically. Nothing broke. She just stopped, like a motor that has been running without oil for long enough that it simply goes quiet. She was still standing there when Theo came in at 7:40. He was carrying a reusable bag with Maisie's lunch tacked inside it. She could see the edge of a sandwich bag and what appeared to be a small container of crackers, because Maisie's school was a block away and he dropped her off on his way in. He looked at Nora. Nora looked at the parking lot. "The position," he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't ask how he knew. He was the kind of person who paid attention. "Yes," she said. He set the bag down, filled his own mug from the sad coffee pot, and sat at the small table by the wall. He did not tell her it would be fine. He did not say something encouraging in the automatic way people say things when they don't know what else to do. He just sat there, quietly, the way he had always done things, efficiently, without waste. After a while, he said, "What would you go after if you were starting from now? Not from before. From now." She turned from the window. "I'm not sure I know how to answer that," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm asking anyway." She thought about it. She actually thought about it, which was different from what she would have done 18 months ago, when she would have answered immediately and decisively and without actually engaging with the question. "Something smaller," she said finally, "something I could actually see the edges of." He nodded. "There's a woman I know," he said. "She runs a small investment cooperative in the Junction. It started as a community lending circle during COVID. She's been trying to formalize it for 2 years. She has the community and the capital base, but she doesn't have the regulatory architecture. She can't pay a firm rate. but she can offer equity in the structure. Nora looked at him. Why are you telling me this? He shrugged with one shoulder. Because you'd be good at it. And because she needs someone who actually understands how a formal fund structure works and doesn't have the ego to burn down what she's already built. That last part landed quietly. She knew he knew it landed. I'm not sure I don't still have that ego, she said. I know, he said. I'm suggesting it anyway. She met with the woman. Her name was Renata. She was 62. She had been running the cooperative out of a converted laundromat space and kept the books in a battered 3-ring binder that Nora found both alarming and, unexpectedly, moving, and by the end of the second meeting, she had drafted a preliminary framework for how a formal registration might work. It was not glamorous work. It was real work. She went back to Theo after and asked him, directly, why he had connected her. Not as a courtesy. As a genuine question, because nothing in the history between them entitled her to anything, and she knew it, and she needed to understand why he had offered it anyway. He thought about it for a moment. Because Maisie asked about you, he said. Nora blinked. She doesn't know me. I told her about you, he said. When she asked why I'd left the last job, I tried to explain it in a way a 7-year-old could understand. He paused. She asked if you knew that you'd made a mistake. I said I didn't know. She said that people who don't know they've made a mistake can't really fix it, but people who do know deserve a chance to. He looked at his coffee. She's 7, so she said it more like, does she know she was mean? Because if she knows, maybe she's sorry. But the logic was the same. Nora was quiet for a long moment. She sounds remarkable, she said. She is, he said. She really is. What Nora built over the following year was not Ashby Capital. It was smaller, slower, built on a different set of assumptions, that capital exists inside communities before it gets formalized, that the people closest to risk usually understand it best, that there is a kind of precision that only comes from having something real at stake. She thought about Theo's analysis often, the way he had always brought an extra layer of care to anything involving long horizon uncertainty. She understood now that it wasn't a technique. It was a reflex developed by someone who had been managing real uncertainty. The kind that woke you at 2 in the morning with a child's medication schedule for years before anyone ever asked him to apply it professionally. She registered the cooperative formally in April. Renata cried, which made Nora look away at the window and blink several times. She asked Theo in June whether he would want to consult on the risk modeling. Part-time, structured around his schedule, paid fairly for what she could afford. He said he'd think about it. He came back the next day and said yes. There was an afternoon that autumn when Maisie came to the office because her school had a PA day and Theo hadn't been able to arrange anything else. She sat in the corner with a book and a container of crackers and periodically made observations about the plants that Nora had started keeping on the windowsill. First because someone had given her one and she hadn't wanted to throw it away, and then because more had accumulated the way things do when you stop moving so fast that you can't keep anything alive. At one point, Maisie looked up from her book and said, very matter-of-factly, your office smells like outside. Nora looked at her. Is that bad? Maisie considered it. No, she said. I like it. It smells like you made space. Nora looked at the plants on the windowsill for a moment, the afternoon light moving through the leaves in that particular way it does in October in Ontario, gold and unhurried. She thought, maybe that's exactly what happened. She had not arrived at this office by succeeding. She had arrived by losing, specifically, the thing she had held most tightly, the title, the floor, the particular kind of certainty that passes for confidence when you haven't yet learned what you don't know. And somewhere in the rubble of that, she had found something smaller and realer, and she was only just beginning to be able to say this, even to herself, something she actually cared about, not for what it proved, not for what it would look like in print, just for itself. She looked at Maisie, who had returned to her book with complete absorption, the way children do when the world outside the page temporarily stops being interesting. Thank you, Nora said quietly. Maisie didn't look up. For what? Nora thought about it. For asking the right question, she said. Maisie turned a page. You're welcome, she said, the way 7-year-olds say it, automatically, absently, and somehow entirely sincerely. Outside, the October light kept doing what it does, moving across the floor, unhurried. indifferent to whether you caught it in time or not. This time, Nora was not moving fast enough to miss it. I keep coming back to something a 7-year-old said, and I don't think I'll stop coming back to it for a long time. Does she know she was mean? Because if she knows, maybe she's sorry. Maisie didn't say that to be wise. She said it because she's 7 and she was asking her dad a real question about a real person who had hurt him. But the logic in it, that clarity, that simple and unsparing condition, is something I think most adults have spent years learning how to avoid. Nora knew. That's the part of this story I keep sitting with. She didn't need someone to tell her she'd made a mistake. When she told Theo his daughter's surgery wasn't a good enough reason to miss a client meeting. She knew in the moment. She just didn't stop, because stopping felt like losing ground, and losing ground felt like the thing she was most afraid of. And then she lost everything anyway. I think that's how it tends to work. Not as punishment. I don't believe the universe is keeping score in that tidy a way. But actions have weight, and when we ignore that weight long enough, it accumulates somewhere we're not looking. Nora had built something real. She was genuinely talented. But talent without integrity is just capability pointed in whatever direction is most convenient, and convenience has a way of catching up with you. What strikes me about Theo is that he never stopped being decent, even when decency cost him. He left a job he was good at a time when he couldn't really afford to, because staying would have meant accepting that his daughter mattered less than a quarterly presentation. That's not a small thing. That kind of moral steadiness, knowing what you won't compromise even when the pressure is real, that takes something most of us are still building in ourselves. And then later, when he had every reason to look the other way, he didn't. He saw Nora standing at that kitchen window with the life drained out of her face, and he asked her the one question that mattered. What would you go after if you started from now? Not from her old life. From the actual present. That question took intelligence, not book intelligence, but the kind that comes from paying careful attention to what's real versus what's just comfortable to believe. The resilience piece is the one I find hardest to write about because I think we misunderstand it. We tend to treat it like toughness, like the ability to not fall apart. But Nora did fall apart. She sat on the edge of a rented bed and understood, maybe for the first time, that the armor she'd been wearing wasn't protection. It was just distance. Real resilience, I think, is what comes after that. The willingness to get up and try something smaller and truer, without the guarantee that it will work, without the title to prove you're worth taking seriously. She built something she could actually see the edges of, and she let Maisie's crackers and her opinion about grilled cheese and the October light through the window plants be part of what that felt like. That's not a small ending. That's the whole thing, actually.